So with all of the geometry in place, we can now start thinking about texturing. But before we can apply or paint any image maps on the fish, we need to UV it. So let's go to the UV tab and also to the Lists tab, expand UV maps. Now you'll already have a couple of UV maps in there, and these are just junk UVs that are created during the modeling process. So just select them, right click and delete, then click New Map, and we'll call this Rockfish 1. So what we're going to do is gradually work through this model, UVing it section by section. And we're going to start with the fins. So let's turn symmetry on the X, and in polygon mode I'm going to select a polygon on this pectoral fin, hold down shift in the up arrow and expand the selection to there. Shift H will hide the rest of the fish, then go to edge mode, and we want to select these edges running around the edge of the fin, but we want it to stop there. On the Unwrap tool, have 1000 iterations, click in a 3D view, that UVs those fins, spacebar to drop the tool, deselect those edges, hit W, and we'll just move those UVs off to one side. So hit U to unhide the rest of the fish, and then we can do the same with this fin. So select a poly, shift in the up arrow to there, shift H, edge mode, select your edges, unwrap, click in the viewport, deselect and move off to one side. So hit U. Now we can do the anal fin, shift H, edge mode, double click. Actually in this case we can just select two edges and hold down the up arrow and stop there. Unwrap, click in the viewport, deselect, move off to one side, unhide, and same here. Select the polygons, shift H, select your edges to that, unwrap, click in the viewport, and again move off to one side. So we'll leave the tail for now, but we can do this spiny dorsal fin. Now to select it, we just need to select two polygons near the base, hold down shift in the close bracket, and that will select the side of the selection which has the least number of polygons. Then hold down shift in the up arrow just to expand it once, shift H, then we'll go to the right hand view, and then we'll run the project from view tool, click in the viewport, and that creates a snapshot of the UVs. So if I deselect those polygons, you can see that the UVs are red, and that means the UVs are overlapping each other, and I don't want that. So to fix it, I'm going to go to the front view, zoom in, turn symmetry off, go to a wireframe view, then I'll hold down my right mouse button and I'm going to lasso one side. So let's go back to texture view, and I just want to make sure that I haven't selected too much. I have here, so I'm just going to hold down Control, deselect these polygons. Okay, so now go to the UV viewport. I'm going to run the move tool, check tear off, and then move those UVs down. Drop the tool, and then I need to flip it over. So go to mirror UVs, and I want to mirror it on the U axis. Click OK. So with all of the fins UV'd, we can now hide them by selecting them in the UV viewport and hitting H. And now we can UV the body. So I'm going to turn symmetry back on the X. I'm going to use my middle mouse button to select through. And then we want to select just up to the gill. So I'm just going to paint select this top section. Follow the line of the head to there. Actually, I'll deselect that bit. I'll come under here. Inside this gill. Now we just need to select polygons in there. Okay, so we can hit Shift H, that'll hide the head. Then in edge mode we just need to select the center line, and then we can run the Unwrap tool and click in the viewport. Now this UV island is actually upside down, so I'm going to hit E and I'm going to rotate it by 180 degrees. Let me move it up a little bit, and then we'll just move that off to one side and then hit U. So next select the third gill, hit Shift H, and then just select the center line, run the Unwrap tool and click in the viewport. We'll move that off to one side. So next select the inside of the mouth, Shift H, in edge mode, double click along the middle and run Unwrap. So then select the second gill and also the jaw, Shift H, go to edge mode, double click on the center line again and run Unwrap. So select the back of the first gill, run the Unwrap tool, and then we can move that off. Hit H to hide it, and then we can do the rest of the head. So double click on it to select it, Shift H will hide the eyes, then in edge mode double click on the center line and run the Unwrap tool. Now the reason I UV'd this section in two pieces was to make the unwrapping process easier, but once it's unwrapped there's nothing stopping us joining it back together again. So to do that, in edge mode I'm just going to lasso this edge, and the corresponding edge will be highlighted in blue, and then I can go to with options, move and sew, and choose average and click OK. So I've rotated it around so it's horizontal. If I hit Shift Tab you can see that some of these edges need to be straightened up, so I'm just going to hit T for element move. I'm just going to move these up individually. So the last thing to UV are the eyes. So I'm going to lasso all of the UVs that I've created so far, hit H to hide them, then I'm going to double click on the outside surface of the eye and hide that, and I'm also going to hide the lens. Now I want to UV the eye slightly differently. I want to UV it so it uses up as little of UV space as possible. So to do that I'm going to turn symmetry off, select one of the eyes and delete it, then select two polygons on there, hit L to select loop, hold down Shift and hit the up arrow twice, then run the Unwrap tool, click in the UV view, drop the tool and deselect the polygons, and then we just need to mirror it over. So I'm going to open up the model palette, go to duplicate, mirror, run an origin action center and click in the viewport. And you can see now that those UVs are overlapping each other. So the advantage of UVing an object like this is it uses up a lot less space, but the disadvantage is I'm not able to paint any asymmetry into the model now. So it's worth bearing that in mind before you UV an object like this. So hit U to unhide, and now we have all of our UVs in the UV view, but they're all the wrong scale. And to find out exactly how out of scale they are, we can go to the Model tab, let's open up the preset browser, and if you go to Materials, Miscellaneous and UV Checker, we have a UV Checker material here, so just drag and drop that onto the rockfish. So we need these squares to be roughly the same size. You can see by comparing the body to the fins how out of scale they are. Now we can rescale the UVs automatically with a tool called Pack UVs. So I'm going to run Pack UVs. Now in the dialog I'm going to accept all the defaults, but I want to make sure that Lock Stacked is active. So what Lock Stacked is going to do is it's going to make sure that any UVs that are sitting on top of each other, like our eyes, are going to remain sitting on top of each other when they're scaled. So I'm going to click OK. Take a moment or two to run. You can see it packs it all into 0 to 1 in UV space, and if you look in the 3D view all the squares are roughly the same size, and also importantly the eye UVs are still stacked on top of each other. So next we need to look at all these little circles inside each square, and again they need to be roughly the same size. If they're not, then we've got distortion. And there's only two areas on this model which are causes for concern. First of all, we've got this section here. You can see the circles on that side are about 4 times the size as the circles on there. And also the base of this dorsal fin, you can see how they're stretching at the seam. So to fix this area, just find the UV, we go to edge mode, and we'll just select the corresponding edge, and then if I hit W, I can just move that up, and you can see the image map adjusting in 3D. Now fixing this area is a little bit more complicated. We'll start by selecting the polygons that are causing the problem. Now selecting something makes it difficult to see the image map in the 3D viewport, so I'm going to hit O to bring up viewport properties. I'm just going to decheck show selections. So then we want to hit the move tool, click in the UV view, make sure tear off is active, and we'll just separate that from the head, drop the tool, and then I'm going to run the UV relax tool. I've got about 240 iterations there, and just click in the viewport, and you can see immediately those circles have evened up. Then you can hit R and scale them up until those circles are the right size. So they're now roughly the right size, but you can see we've still got some problem areas. The circles in this area are too big and the circles in this area are too small. So and select it, and I'm going to run a linear fall off, drag that linear fall off across the problem area, hit R, click at the bottom or the base of the fall off, and I'm going to scale this in, and you can see that start to fix. Drop the tool, and then I'm going to move the fall off to the other area, hit R, click at the base of the fall off, and this time I'm going to scale it out. So now I want to join this back to the head, so I'm going to move it as close as I can to there. And if I go to edge mode, select the edges that need to be joined, and then I'm going to click move and sew unselected. Now you can see I've got some polygons crossing there, so I'm going to hit T and just move those apart. So now we just need to do the same thing on the other side. So now it's just a jigsaw puzzle. As long as we don't scale any of these UV islands independently, we can rotate and position them anywhere we want. So the aim is to pack them as tightly as possible into this 0 to 1 UV space. But the one thing I am going to try and do is I'm going to try and keep all of the fin UVs in the same area. So I've organized it into roughly a square, and then to make sure that it's fitting into the UV space properly, we can just use fit UVs. So this UV map is going to be great for painting a color map or a bump map or a specular map. We can paint in symmetry, but then we can also turn symmetry off and create asymmetrical elements on it. But when it comes to painting a displacement map and a transparency map, we're going to have a problem. And the reason is because we've unwrapped all of these fins, it's going to be very difficult to paint a spine on one side and make sure that it matches on the other side. So what we need is a separate UV map specifically for displacement and transparency. So to create the second UV map, we can go to the shader tree and delete that UV checker material. You don't need it anymore. Come down to the lists tab. We're going to right click on Rockfish 1 and select copy, create a new map, and we'll call this Rockfish 2, and then right click and paste. Then we need to select the elements of this UV that we don't want. So I must select all of the fins, and then right click and clear. So now we need to UV the fins again, but in a different way. Luckily we can use the first UV map to help us select things. So start with the dorsal fin, select it in Rockfish 1, then go back to Rockfish 2, go to the right hand view, and we'll use the project from view tool, and then I'll just move that away. Go back to here, then we'll select this fin, go back to that UV, and I just want to look at it, to move it in the viewport so I'm looking straight at it. And again, run project from view, move it onto that side, go back to Rockfish 1, select this one, and we need to do the same. Back to Rockfish 2, project from view, back to Rockfish 1, select the soft dorsal fin, go at the side view, project from view, go back to Rockfish 2 and project from view, move that out of the way, back to Rockfish 1, and we'll select the anal fin, back to Rockfish 2, project from view, back to Rockfish 1. I just got two more to do, just these two pelvic fins. Again, just look at them in 3D. Just going to line them up with the viewport, go back to Rockfish 2, project from view, and finally this one. So now I can paint a single stroke across this fin and it'll appear on both sides of it. But also, if I select this one and mirror it and then place that over that one, if I put a single stroke across it now, it's going to paint a spine on both sides of both fins. So I've stacked those fin UVs on top of each other, but of course there's one fin we haven't looked at yet, and that's the tail fin. So in polygon mode I'm just going to lasso select the tail fin in the UV view, run the move tool, turn on tear off, bring it down here, we'll mirror that fin and then place it on top of the other one. So I've scaled those fin UVs down and placed them inside the 0 to 1 UV space, and the reason I've kept the rest of the UVs intact and in the same place will become clear once we start painting. But now we've got the UVs complete, we need to export them so we can open them up in Photoshop. So select one of the UV maps, go to texture, export UVs to EPS, we'll give it a name, we'll call this Rockfish 2. We'll select Rockfish 1 and we'll save that out as well. So we may have finished all of the geometric modelling, but these fins are far from finished. So to add more detail to them, we're going to create a displacement map and a transparency map. So I'm going to start by surface naming the fish. So I'm going to select the fish, hit M, and I'll call this RF body. Hit H to hide it. Then select the outer geometry for the eye, hit M, and I'll call that RF cornea. Hit H to hide that, and I'm going to select the lenses, hit M, and we'll call that RF lens. And then I'm going to select the iris, hit U to unhide, then hit M again, and we want the iris to have the same material as the body. So I'm going to select RF body. Now I've already painted the displacement and transparency maps in Photoshop using the EPS files that we saved out earlier as a starting point. So let's go over to Photoshop, locate the Rockfish 2 EPS that you saved, and we'll open this up, and I'm going to start with quite a big resolution, so I'm going to have it as a 4K map. And what I usually do to start is to create a new layer, put that beneath the layer that's already in there, and just with the flood tool just flood the background. So that's your starting point for painting. So what I want to do next is take you through the steps that I went through to create these image maps, and I'm going to do it using the PSD file that I created. So if you look in your image directory, you should find a PSD file called Rockfish2. So if you go to the layers palette, let's just hide transparency, bring back the white background and also the spine paths. So I started out by creating paths for each spine on each fin. Then on a black background I filled in those paths in white. I then blurred them, and then I painted what I called sub-spines, which are just thin lines in between each of those major spines, and then I blurred those too. So then I painted a layer on top of that which just blended the displacement out to black at the root of each fin, and that will just ensure that the displacement would blend out smoothly into the body of the fish. So that's the displacement map done, so I saved that out as a PNG. So back in Modo, let's select the Rockfish 2 UV and also the RF body material. We'll go to Add Layer, Image Map, Load Image, and I'm going to select that displacement map that I saved out. So we need to change the effect of that image map, so right click in the effect column in the shader tree, go down to Surface Shading and select Displacement, and then to see it properly we'll go over to the Render tab, and let's zoom into some of the fins. Now obviously that displacement is too much at the moment, so I'm going to select the material and I'm going to change the displacement distance to 1 millimeter. So I've just done a quick render so we can see the displacement more clearly. We're getting some really nice detail in there, but the whole thing looks too solid. Fins are almost translucent, and also the ends of them are very ragged, and that's why we need a transparency map. So back in Photoshop I then loaded the displacement map back in and inverted it. And I copied the spine gradient layer from the displacement map and placed that on top of it to create the gradation from the fin to the body. And then on top of that I used the spine paths to create black spines on top of that, and then I blurred those. Then I painted a black background, and then in solid white I painted the outside edge of each fin. I tried to create this ragged edge, and finally just put some subtle transparency across the spiny dorsal fin. So I saved that off as a PNG, and then back in Modo, again with the Rockfish 2 UV selected, go to Add Layer, Image Map, Load Image, and we'll select the transparency map, load that in, right click in the effect column and set the effect to transparent amount. So I've just done another quick render, and you can see the effect now is much more realistic. We've got some subtle transparency in there, and of course this ragged edge. So there's one final bit of transparency that we have to paint, and that's the skin that sits on top of the eyeball. Before we do that, I just want to give the cornea and lens a rough material. So let's select the cornea material. We'll just drop the diffuse amount to 0, go to Material Trans and set the transparency amount to 100, and let's set the refractive index to the refractive index of water. And I'm just right click and copy, select the lens material, right click and paste. So I just want to hide the iris so we don't paint on that by accident. So I'm going to come inside the fish, let's select the two cornea, hit H, then we'll select those two and hit H. Then select the transparency map, and also make sure you've got the Rockfish 2 UV selected. Let's turn symmetry on the X. Let's run the paintbrush, and with a white foreground colour we can start to paint out the eye. So make sure you don't bring the paint right into the corner of the eye, and also try and make it a bit ragged in places. And then I'm going to run the blur tool and just blur it out. So when you unhide the eyeball and look at it in preview, you'll now get a really nice blend between the colour of the iris and the skin of the fish. So in the final animation we're going to be seeing the fish from this kind of distance, And you can see by adding that displacement and transparency map that the fins are looking much more believable. But importantly, the underlying geometry is going to be very easy to animate.